The rain hammered against the hospital window like accusations, each drop a reminder of all the prayers that had gone unanswered. Maya pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the world blur into watercolor streaks of gray and amber. Behind her, the steady beep of machines counted down her mother's remaining heartbeats, like a cruel metronome. "She's stable for now," Dr. Peterson had said, his voice carrying the weight of practiced sympathy. "But the cancer has spread faster than we anticipated. We're looking at weeks, maybe days." Maya's reflection stared back at her from the window hollow-eyed, 26 years old, but feeling ancient. She'd been whispering the same two words for months now, sometimes to God, sometimes to the universe, sometimes to anyone who might be listening. "Help me." The words had started as desperate pleas during her mother's first chemotherapy session. They'd evolved into quiet mantras during sleepless nights when she'd researched experimental treatments on her laptop until dawn. Now they escaped her lips, like breathing, an involuntary response to the weight of watching the only person who'd ever truly understood her slowly slip away. "Help me," she whispered again, her breath fogging the glass. The hospital corridor behind her buzzed with the familiar chaos of evening shift change nurses rushing past, families huddled in consultation rooms, the distant echo of a child crying somewhere in pediatrics. She'd been living in this sterile world for 3 months now, ever since her mother's routine checkup had revealed the shadow on her lung that changed everything. Maya had quit her job at the marketing firm, subletting her apartment to move back into her childhood bedroom. Every dollar of her savings had gone toward treatments insurance wouldn't cover. Every connection she'd made in her professional life had been leveraged for second opinions and specialist referrals. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her entire adult life building independence, creating distance from the small town where she'd grown up, from the house where her mother had raised her alone after her father's death. Now she was right back where she'd started, and it felt like both a homecoming and a prison. "Miss Chen," a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. Maya turned to see a young nurse she didn't recognize, someone new to the oncology floor. "Your mother's asking for you." Maya nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. She'd become an expert at transitioning between private grief and public strength, switching masks as easily as changing clothes. Her mother needed her to be brave, needed her to be the daughter who had answers and hope and endless reserves of optimism. Walking back toward room 3, Maya passed the small chapel where she'd spent countless hours over the past weeks. The wooden pews had become as familiar as her own furniture, the stained glass windows telling stories of miracles she'd begun to doubt. She paused at the doorway, watching an elderly man pray with the kind of desperate fervor she recognized in herself. "Help me," she whispered one more time, not sure if she was asking for her mother's healing, for her own strength, or simply for the courage to face whatever came next. The words hung in the air like incense, floating somewhere between hope and surrender. As she reached for the door handle to her mother's room, Maya had no idea that her whispered plea had just been heard and that help was already walking down the corridor behind her, wearing scrubs and carrying a clipboard, with eyes that seemed to hold starlight and hands that were about to change everything. Dr. Ethan Rivers had arrived at Mercy General 2 days ago, his transfer from Johns Hopkins still fresh enough that his ID badge caught the light differently than the weathered ones worn by veteran staff. He'd requested the oncology assignment specifically, though he hadn't shared his reasons with the chief of staff. Some motivations were too personal to explain in professional settings. He'd been reading Maya's mother's chart when he first heard the whispered words echoing down the corridor. "Help me." The phrase stopped him mid-step, his pen hovering over the prescription pad. There was something in that voice, a quality of desperation he recognized from his own darkest moments, that made him look up from the medical notes and pay attention. Ethan had spent the last 6 months in a leave of absence, wrestling with his own demons after losing his younger sister to the same disease, now ravaging Alina Chen's body. The parallels weren't lost on him. A daughter watching helplessly, a mother fighting a battle she couldn't win, a family reduced to 2 people clinging to each other while the world continued spinning around them. He'd seen Maya during his rounds, always curled in the same chair beside her mother's bed, her laptop balanced on her knees as she researched treatments that insurance companies deemed experimental and therefore unnecessary. He'd watched her navigate conversations with specialists, her voice steady and professional even when her hands shook. She reminded him of himself at 26, when he'd believed that intelligence and determination could solve any problem. That love was strong enough to hold death at bay. The difference was that Maya was still fighting. Ethan had given up. When he'd walked away from medicine 6 months ago, He'd sworn he was done watching families disintegrate in sterile rooms that smelled of disinfectant and false hope. But here he was, drawn back by something he couldn't name, carrying an experimental treatment protocol in his briefcase that he'd been too afraid to use until now. Dr. Rivers, the charge nurse, Patricia, approached with a stack of charts. The Chen family in 314, they're asking about the new trial program, something about immunotherapy. Ethan nodded, his decision crystallizing. I'll speak with them. The daughter's been advocating pretty aggressively for her mother. She's done her homework, knows more about oncology than some residents. You might want to prepare for some tough questions. As Ethan walked toward room 314, he could hear voices through the partially open door. Maya was reading aloud from what sounded like a medical journal, her voice gentle but animated as she translated complex research into hopeful possibilities for her mother. This study from Stanford shows a 37% response rate in patients with similar staging, Maya was saying. I know it's not a guarantee, but it's something. It's more than we had yesterday. Alina Chun's voice was weak but warm. Sweetheart, you don't have to. I want to. Maya interrupted. I need to if there's even a chance. Ethan paused outside the door, remembering similar conversations with his sister. The endless research, the desperate hope, the way families clung to percentages and statistics like lifelines. He'd been on the other side then, the one with the medical degree and the growing certainty that some battles couldn't be won. But he'd also been carrying around a file folder for 6 months, filled with research he'd compiled during his leave. A new protocol that combined traditional chemotherapy with targeted immunotherapy. Something that existed in the space between proven treatment and experimental hope. He'd intended to present it to the medical board at Johns Hopkins to get approval for a formal trial. Instead, he'd requested a transfer to a smaller hospital where oversight was lighter and exceptions could be made for extraordinary circumstances. He knocked softly on the doorframe. Mrs. Chen, Miss Chen, I'm Dr. Rivers. I'm new to the oncology team, and I'd like to discuss some treatment options with you. Maya looked up from her laptop, her eyes sharp with the kind of alertness that came from too much caffeine and too little sleep. We've already discussed the standard protocols with Dr. Peterson. If you're here to explain why we need to accept palliative care, actually, Ethan interrupted gently, I'm here to talk about a treatment option that might not be on your current list. The room fell silent. Maya's fingers stopped typing, and even the steady beep of the monitors seemed to pause. Hope was a dangerous thing in oncology wards, but sometimes it was the only medicine that mattered. I've been working on a protocol that combines immunotherapy with a targeted approach based on genetic markers. It's not officially approved yet, but under compassionate use guidelines, double quotes, he met Maya's eyes. I think your mother might be a candidate. Maya's whispered help. Me had been heard. Now the real work was about to begin. The conference room smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the scattered medical journals and research papers. Ethan had spread across the table. Maya sat across from him, her mother's latest test results clutched in her hands like a sacred text, while Alina dozed in the wheelchair beside them. The genetic markers are a match, Ethan said, pointing to a highlighted section of the lab report. Your mother's tumor expresses the specific proteins that make her an ideal candidate for this treatment. But I need you to understand this isn't a cure. It's a chance. Maya studied the documents he'd laid out, her marketing background serving her well as she passed through medical terminology and statistical projections. The Stanford study you mentioned, the 37% response rate, that was with a similar protocol. Similar, but not identical. What I'm proposing combines elements from 3 different trials, plus a targeted therapy that's shown promise in preliminary studies. We're essentially creating a personalized treatment plan based on your mother's specific tumor profile. The honesty in his voice was what convinced her. Other doctors had spoken in careful euphemisms, dancing around harsh realities with professional kindness. Ethan spoke to her like an equal, acknowledging both the hope and the risk with equal weight. What are the side effects? Maya asked, though she'd already been researching immunotherapy complications for weeks. Severe fatigue, possible autoimmune reactions, nausea that's often worse than traditional chemotherapy. There's also a risk of cytokine release syndrome. Essentially, her immune system could overreact to the treatment. In rare cases, that can be like... Maya looked at her mother, who had woken up and was listening with the kind of calm attention she'd always brought to difficult conversations. Alina Chen had been a high school principal for 30 years. Accustomed to making decisions that affected other people's lives, now she was being asked to make a decision that would determine the length and quality of her own. What does your gut tell you? Elena asked Ethan directly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. Medically, the data suggests I didn't ask for medical data, Elena interrupted gently. I asked what your gut tells you. You've been doing this long enough to know the difference between what the numbers say and what feels right. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded on the table. 6 months ago, I would have said the risks outweigh the potential benefits. 6 months ago, I would have recommended palliative care and quality time with family. What changed? Maya asked. I lost someone I loved to this disease. Someone who never got the chance to try a treatment like this because I was too conservative, too afraid of false hope. He looked directly at Elena. My gut tells me that dying while fighting is different from dying while giving up. And if the treatment works, if you're part of that 37% who respond, then we're not just buying time, we're buying years. Maya felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. How long do we have to decide? The sooner we start, the better. But I want you to take tonight to think about it. This isn't just a medical decision, it's a decision about how you want to spend whatever time you have left. That evening, Maya sat in her mother's room as the sun set behind the hospital windows, painting the walls in shades of gold and amber. They'd been having versions of this conversation for months, but tonight felt different. Tonight, there was an actual choice to make. I keep thinking about your father, Elena said softly. He was diagnosed with his heart condition when you were 12. Do you remember? The doctors said he might have 5 years if he was lucky. Maya nodded. She remembered the months of tests, the consultations with specialists, the way her parents had spoken in hushed tones after they thought she was asleep. He lived for 8 more years, Elena continued. Not because the doctors were wrong, but because he decided to fight for every day. He said he wanted to see you graduate high school, wanted to walk you down the aisle someday. He didn't get to do the second one, but he got to do the first. Are you saying you want to try the treatment? Elena reached for her daughter's hand. I'm saying I want to see you fall in love. I want to see you find someone who makes you laugh the way your father made me laugh. I want to see you build a life that's bigger than just taking care of me. Maya squeezed her mother's hand. Then we fight, Elena agreed. Outside in the corridor, Ethan was updating charts when he heard Maya's voice through the door. Help me make this work. But this time, the words weren't whispered in desperation. They were spoken with determination, with a kind of hope that could move mountains, or at least hold them steady long enough to find a way around them. The infusion suite, at Mercy General, looked more like a coffee shop than a medical facility, with its warm lighting and comfortable recliners arranged in a semicircle around large windows that overlooked the hospital's garden. Maya had learned to appreciate these small touches. The way the staff had tried to make a place of treatment feel less like a place of dying. Elena was settled in chair number 7, her favorite spot because it offered the best view of the oak tree that had just begun to turn autumn colors. The 4-pole beside her held 3 different bags of medication, each one representing a different aspect of Ethan's experimental protocol. The immunotherapy goes in first, Ethan explained, checking the flow rate on the primary line. This is the part that's going to teach your immune system to recognize the cancer cells as foreign invaders. Then we follow with the targeted therapy, which should help the immune response be more effective. Maya had brought her laptop, as always, but found herself watching her mother's face instead of working. Elena looked remarkably peaceful for someone who was essentially volunteering to be a medical experiment. She'd always been the steady one, the person who could find calm in any storm. How are you feeling? Maya asked as the first hour passed. Like I'm doing something instead of just waiting, Elena replied. That's worth something. The treatment took 4 hours. Maya had expected immediate side effects, visible changes, some sign that her mother's body was responding to the cocktail of medications flowing through her veins. Instead, it was remarkably mundane. Elena dozed, woke up to sip ginger tea, dozed again. The monitors beeped steadily. Nurses checked vitals every 30 minutes and pronounced everything within normal parameters. Ethan stopped by during his afternoon rounds, reviewing the latest lab results with the kind of focused attention Maya had come to associate with him. He'd been present for every appointment, every decision, every moment of uncertainty. It was more than professional dedication. There was something personal in the way he advocated for her mother, something that spoke to his own losses and motivations. The inflammatory markers are actually lower than I expected, he said, showing Maya the numbers on his tablet. Her body is tolerating the treatment well so far. So far, Maya repeated. What should we expect over the next few days? Fatigue, most likely. The immunotherapy is essentially revving up her immune system, which takes energy. Some patients experience flu-like symptoms as their body adjusts. The important thing is that we're not seeing any signs of cytokine release syndrome. Over the following week, Maya watched her mother navigate the side effects with the same grace she'd brought to everything else. Alina slept more, but complained less. She ate smaller meals but seemed to actually taste them. Most importantly, she began talking about future plans, small things, like wanting to see the hospital garden in spring. Bigger things, like hoping to attend Maya's eventual wedding. I've been thinking about what happens after, Alina said one afternoon, as they sat in the garden during a break between treatments. Not after the treatment, but after I'm better. What do you want to do with your life, sweetheart? Maya looked up from her phone, where she'd been researching clinical trial results. I want to make sure you stay better. That's not a life plan, that's a holding pattern. I want to know what Maya wants, not what the daughter of a cancer patient wants. The question caught Maya off guard. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she'd stopped thinking about anything beyond the next scan, the next treatment, the next doctor's appointment. Her own dreams had been shelved so completely that she'd almost forgotten what they were. I used to want to travel, she said finally. Before all this started, I was saving up for a trip to Ireland. I wanted to see the cliffs of Moher, maybe take a writing workshop in Dublin. What's stopping you? Mom, you have cancer. I'm not going anywhere. Alina reached for her daughter's hand. What if the treatment works? What if 6 months from now, I'm in remission? Would you go then? Maya hesitated. The question implied a future she'd been afraid to imagine. A world where her mother's illness wasn't the organizing principle of her entire existence. Maybe, she said quietly. Good, because I've been thinking about what I want to do when I'm better too. I want to see you happy. I want to watch you build a life that's bigger than just taking care of me. That evening, as Maya sat in her mother's hospital room updating her research spreadsheets, she found herself thinking about Ireland, about cliffs and writing workshops, and the possibility of a future that included both her mother's health and her own dreams. She glanced at her mother, who was sleeping peacefully, and whispered again, "Help me believe this might actually work." In the corridor outside, Ethan was finishing his notes when he heard her voice through the door. But this time, he didn't just hear desperation. He heard something that might have been hope. 3 weeks into the treatment, Maya's phone buzzed. At 6:47 a.m. with a text from Ethan. "Can you come in early today? We need to discuss the latest scans." Maya's heart plummeted. In her experience, early morning meetings with oncologists meant bad news. The kind of conversations that required privacy and tissues and gentle explanations about next steps. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she tried to apply mascara, then gave up and drove to the hospital, with her eyes still swollen from another sleepless night. The conference room was different this time, brighter somehow. Though Maya couldn't pinpoint exactly why, Ethan was already there, surrounded by computer monitors displaying what looked like side-by-side medical images. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his posture that seemed less weighted than usual. "Maya, thank you for coming in so early. I wanted to show you something before we discuss it with your mother." She sat down, bracing herself for the worst. "The treatment isn't working." "Actually," Ethan said, turning one of the monitors toward her. "Look at this." The screen showed 2 CT scans, dated 3 weeks apart. Even with her limited medical knowledge, Maya could see the difference. The shadows that had dominated the first image, the tumors that had been growing relentlessly, despite months of conventional treatment, were smaller, noticeably smaller. "I need you to understand what you're looking at," Ethan continued, his voice carefully controlled. "This scan was taken before we started the immunotherapy protocol. This one was taken yesterday morning. The primary tumor has shrunk by approximately 40%. The secondary growths have either shrunk or disappeared entirely." Maya stared at the images, afraid to let herself understand what she was seeing. "What does that mean?" "It means your mother is responding to the treatment. Her immune system is working exactly the way we hoped it would. The cancer cells are being recognized and destroyed." The room seemed to tilt. Maya gripped the edge of the table, trying to process information that felt too large for her mind to hold. "Are you saying she's going to be okay?" "I'm saying we're seeing a significant response to treatment. It's still early, and we need to continue monitoring her progress. But Maya, this is exactly what we hoped for." The tears came then, 3 months of suppressed hope and terror finally finding their way to the surface. Maya covered her face with her hands, sobbing with a kind of relief that felt like being pulled back from the edge of a cliff. I need to call her, she said when she could speak again. I need to tell her, actually. I'd like to be the one to share the news, if that's okay. I want to make sure she understands both the good news and the importance of continuing treatment. Maya nodded, wiping her eyes. Can I be there when you tell her? I wouldn't do it any other way. Alina was awake when they entered room 314, sitting up in bed with her laptop open, working on what appeared to be a crossword puzzle. She looked up as they approached, her expression shifting from casual morning greeting to focused attention as she registered the significance of their joint visit. Good morning, Dr. Rivers. Maya, you're here early. Mom, Dr. Rivers has some news about your scans. Alina closed the laptop and gave them her full attention. I'm ready. Ethan pulled up a chair beside the bed. Alina, the scans we took yesterday show that the treatment is working. The tumors are shrinking. Your body is responding exactly the way we hoped it would. Alina was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. How much smaller? The primary tumor has shrunk by about 40%. Some of the smaller growths have disappeared completely. Maya watched her mother's face, expecting tears or exclamations of joy or some dramatic response to what felt like miraculous news. Instead, Alina nodded slowly, as if she were processing information she'd been expecting. So what happens now? She asked. We continue the treatment. We monitor your progress. We adjust the protocol if needed. And we start thinking about what remission might look like. Alina looked at her daughter, who was still crying with relief and hope, and 3 months of accumulated fear finally finding its way to the surface. Sweetheart, Alina said gently, I told you we were going to fight. I know, but I was so scared it wouldn't work. I was so scared I was going to lose you. You're not going to lose me. At least not to this. Alina reached for Maya's hand. Now tell me, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Maya laughed through her tears. I don't know. I can't think past being grateful. We'll start thinking, Alina said firmly. Because I intend to be around long enough to see you figure it out. As Ethan left the room, he heard Maya's voice one more time. Help me know what to do with this gift. But this time, the words weren't whispered. In desperation, they were spoken with the kind of gratitude that comes from being given back a future you thought you'd lost. 2 months later, Maya stood in the hospital garden, watching her mother attend to the small herb garden she'd convinced the staff to let her plant. Alina moved carefully, but with purpose, her hands steady as she pruned basil and watered the thyme that had somehow managed to flourish despite the early winter frost. The rosemary is my favorite, Alina said, brushing her fingers against the silvery leaves. It smells like possibility. Maya smiled, understanding exactly what her mother meant. Everything smelled like possibility. Now the morning coffee she'd started drinking for pleasure instead of necessity. The emails from the marketing firm asking if she might consider freelance work. Even the hospital itself, which had transformed from a place of dying to a place of healing. Dr. Rivers said your latest scans look even better than the last ones, Maya said, settling onto the bench beside the garden. He did. Clean margins, no new growth, existing tumors continuing to shrink. Alina sat beside her daughter, dirt still under her fingernails. He also said, I could start thinking about going home soon. Home. The word carried different weight now. Maya had been living in her childhood bedroom for 5 months, her adult life packed into boxes in the garage. Her independence traded for the immediacy of crisis management. The idea of returning to normal felt both wonderful and terrifying. Are you ready for that? Maya asked. I'm ready for you to stop putting your life on hold for me, Alina replied. I'm ready for you to remember what you wanted before all this started. Maya had been thinking about that conversation more frequently as her mother's health stabilized. The crisis that had redefined her world was receding, leaving space for questions she'd been too afraid to ask. What did she want? Who was she when she wasn't primarily defined as a caregiver? I've been thinking about Ireland again, Maya admitted. Not immediately, but maybe in the spring. If you're really in remission by then. I've been thinking about Ireland too, Alina said. I'd like to come with you, if you'd have me. I've never seen those cliffs you used to talk about. Maya turned to stare at her mother. You want to travel? With me. I want to live while I'm alive. I want to see things I've never seen, do things I've never done. I spent 30 years as a principal, being responsible for other people's children. I spent the last 5 months being a patient, being responsible for managing my own dying. I'd like to spend whatever time I have left just being your mother. The idea was so simple, it was revolutionary. Maya had been so focused on the medical, aspects of her mother's recovery that she'd forgotten to imagine what recovery might actually look like. A life after cancer. A relationship not defined by illness. We could take that writing workshop you mentioned, Maya said, warming to the idea. We could stay in a bed and breakfast in Dublin, spend our mornings writing, and our afternoons exploring. We could take terrible tourist photos and eat too much Irish stew and argue about whether James Joyce is brilliant or incomprehensible. Elena added. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the hospital garden prepare for winter. The herbs would die back, but they'd planted bulbs that would emerge in spring. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. Maya, Elena said, eventually, I want to tell you something about Dr. Rivers. What about him? He's in love with you. Maya felt her cheeks burn. Mom, he's my doctor. He's been taking care of you. He's been taking care of both of us. And the way he looks at you has nothing to do with medical care, and everything to do with the fact that he sees something in you that he can't resist. Maya had been aware of Ethan's attention. The way their conversations had evolved from purely medical discussions to something more personal. She'd noticed how he asked about her writing, how he remembered details about her life that had nothing to do with her mother's treatment. But she'd assumed it was just professional kindness, the way doctors sometimes became invested in their patients' families. Even if that were true, Maya said, it would be complicated. He's been part of such a difficult time in our lives, or he's been part of the time when everything changed for the better. Helena countered. Sometimes the people who help us through our darkest moments are the ones who can best appreciate our light. That evening, Maya found herself in the hospital corridor, where she'd spent so many hours whispering desperate prayers. But this time, she wasn't asking for help. She was offering gratitude for the help she'd already received. Thank you, she said quietly, the words directed at the universe, at medicine, at the mysterious forces that had brought Ethan into their lives at exactly the right moment. Behind her, footsteps approached. Maya turned to see Ethan walking toward her, his shift apparently finished, his expression soft with something that might have been affection. Maya, he said, stopping beside her. How are you doing with all these changes? I'm learning to be grateful instead of afraid, she replied. It's harder than you might think. I don't think it's hard at all, Ethan said. I think it's brave. In the space between his words and her response, Maya felt something shift. A door opening, a possibility emerging, a future that included more than just her mother's health and her own relief. Would you like to get coffee sometime? She asked, surprised by her own boldness. When you're not being our doctor. Ethan's smile was answer enough, but he said yes anyway, his voice carrying the same hope that had sustained them all through the darkest months. The coffee shop was warm and crowded, filled with the kind of everyday chaos that Maya had almost forgotten existed outside hospital walls. She and Ethan sat at a corner table, their conversation flowing easily, despite the strangeness of seeing each other in normal clothes. In a normal place, as normal people rather than doctor and patient's daughter. I have to ask you something, Maya said, stirring her latte absently. Why did you really come to Mercy, General? A doctor with your credentials could work anywhere. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. I told you, I lost my sister to cancer. What I didn't tell you is that I was her doctor. Maya set down her cup, understanding immediately why this revelation required privacy. Sarah was 28 when she was diagnosed. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. She asked me to oversee her treatment because she trusted me more than anyone else. Ethan's voice was steady, but Maya could hear the pain underneath. I made every decision based on standard protocols, best practices, proven treatments. I was so afraid of being subjective that I became overly conservative. What happened? She died believing I'd done everything possible. But after she was gone, I found out about trials she could have been eligible for, experimental treatments that might have given her more time. I'd been so focused on not giving false hope that I'd denied her real hope. Maya reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. You were trying to protect her. I was trying to protect myself, from the guilt of recommending something that might not work, from the responsibility of false hope, from having to watch her suffer through treatments that might fail. Ethan looked directly at her. When I heard you whispering, help me in that corridor, I recognized something I'd heard in my own voice after Sarah died. I couldn't save my sister, but maybe I could save your mother. Is that why you developed the protocol? I developed the protocol because I couldn't live with the possibility that there were other families out there facing what Sarah and I faced. Other people who might benefit from a treatment that existed but wasn't being offered. He paused. I came to Mercy General because it's the kind of place where exceptions can be made. where a doctor can treat the patient instead of just following the standard of care. Maya felt tears threatening, but these were different from the tears she'd shed over the past months. These were tears of recognition, of understanding something profound about the man who'd saved her mother's life. "You said you couldn't save your sister," she said gently. "But you saved mine. And in doing that, you saved me too. Maya, I need you to understand something else." Ethan's voice was careful, deliberate. "My feelings for you aren't because you remind me of Sarah or because I'm trying to repair something that can't be fixed. They're because of who you are. The way you advocated for your mother. The way you researched every possibility. The way you never gave up even when giving up would have been easier." "I thought about giving up," Maya admitted. "There were nights when I was so tired of being strong, so tired of hoping, that I just wanted to stop fighting. But you didn't stop. That's what I fell in love with, your refusal to accept defeat, your willingness to fight for the people you love." The word love hung in the air between them, carrying weight that went beyond casual affection. Maya felt her heart racing, not with the anxiety that had become her constant companion, but with something lighter and more frightening. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be someone's daughter and someone's girlfriend at the same time. I don't know how to build a relationship when my whole life has been about crisis management." "We figure it out together," Ethan said. "We take it slowly. We let your mother finish her treatment and get back to her life. We let you remember who you are when you're not just a caregiver. And we see what happens." Maya looked around the coffee shop, at the college students studying for exams, at the business people having lunch meetings, at the ordinary people living ordinary lives. For the first time in months, she could imagine being one of them again. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of being happy. Of letting myself believe that good things can happen. Of trusting that this isn't all going to fall apart." Ethan reached for her other hand, holding both of hers across the table. "I'm scared too. I'm scared of caring about someone again, of having something to lose. But I'm more scared of not trying." Maya looked into his eyes, seeing the same vulnerability she'd been carrying for months. The same willingness to hope, despite the risk. The same determination to fight for something good, even when the odds were uncertain. "Okay," she said. "Let's try." As they walked back to the hospital together, Maya realized that her whispered prayers had evolved again. She was no longer asking for help or expressing gratitude. She was simply present in the moment, aware of the man walking beside her, the mother waiting for her, the future that was beginning to unfold in ways she'd never imagined. "Help me be brave enough for this," she whispered, not as a plea, but as a commitment. Ethan heard her and squeezed her hand. "I already am helping," he said softly. "We're helping each other." Spring arrived at Mercy General with an explosion of color in the hospital garden. The bulbs Elena had planted during her recovery had emerged as planned daffodils and tulips, creating a cheerful contrast to the institutional beige of the building. Maya stood at the window of what had been her mother's room, now empty and waiting for the next family that would need hope and healing. "You're going to miss this place," Ethan said, joining her at the window. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater instead of scrubs because his shift had ended an hour ago. "I'm going to miss the certainty of crisis," Maya replied, surprising herself with the admission. When Mom was sick, every decision was clear. Every day had a purpose. Now I have to figure out what to do with a life that isn't organized around fighting for survival. Elena had been officially declared in remission 2 weeks ago, her latest scans showing no evidence of disease. The celebration had been quiet dinner at her favorite restaurant. A bottle of wine they'd been saving for good news. Tears of relief, instead of fear. But the transition from patient to survivor had been more complicated than any of them had anticipated. "Your mother seems to be adjusting well," Ethan observed. Maya smiled, thinking about Elena's new routine. "She's teaching a pottery class at the community center. She says she wants to learn to make beautiful things with her hands instead of just managing other people's problems. Yesterday she showed me a bowl she'd made completely lopsided and wonderful. And you, what beautiful things are you making?" Maya held up a manuscript she'd been carrying. "I started writing again. Not marketing copy or research summaries, but actual stories. This one's about a woman who learns to hope again, after thinking hope was dangerous. Fiction. Semi-autobiographical fiction." Maya met his eyes. "I'm writing about us." They'd been dating for 3 months now, navigating the transition from crisis relationships to something more sustainable. It hadn't been easy. Maya had to learn to see Ethan as a boyfriend rather than just her mother's doctor. And he had to learn to love someone who wasn't defined by emergency. "What happens to us in your story?" Ethan asked. I don't know yet. I'm still figuring out what happens to us in real life. They'd been taking things slowly, deliberately building a relationship that existed outside the hospital walls. Coffee dates had progressed to dinner dates, which had progressed to long walks and movie nights, and the kind of ordinary romance that Maya had forgotten was possible. Maya, Ethan said carefully, I've been offered a position at Johns Hopkins, the head of their oncology research program. Maya felt her stomach drop. That's wonderful. That's exactly what you wanted. It's what I thought I wanted, but I'm not sure anymore. Why not? Because you're here. Because your mother's here. Because I've built something at Mercy General that I don't want to leave behind. Maya looked out at the garden, at the flowers that would bloom and die, and bloom again, at the cycles of growth and renewal that she was finally learning to trust. You should take the job, she said quietly. Maya, you should take the job because it's the right job for you. Because you can help more people there, develop better treatments, maybe save other families like ours. What about us? Maya turned to face him fully. What about us? Do you think I'm so fragile that I can't handle a relationship that requires effort? Do you think I'm so dependent that I can't figure out how to love someone who doesn't live in the same city? I think you've spent the last 6 months learning to breathe again, and I don't want to be the reason you forget how. Ethan, you're not the reason I learned to breathe. You're the reason I learned to dream about what I might do with all this air in my lungs. He stared at her, and Maya could see him processing the shift in her perspective. She wasn't the desperate woman who'd whispered for help in hospital corridors anymore. She was someone who'd learned to fight for what she wanted. Someone who'd discovered that love wasn't about clinging but about choosing. I've been thinking about Ireland, Maya continued. Mom and I are planning to go this summer. But I've also been thinking about what I want to do when I get back. I want to write. I want to freelance so I can travel. I want to build a life that's big enough to include someone in Baltimore. Are you sure? I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure that I want to see what we can build together. I'm sure that the best relationships are the ones where both people are brave enough to pursue their dreams. Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Maya felt the last of her fear dissolve. This wasn't the desperate clinging of crisis romance. This was the conscious choice of two people who'd learned to hope again. I love you too, he said against her hair. I love your strength and your stubborn refusal to give up, and the way you make me want to be better at saving people. As they walked out of the hospital together, Maya realized that her whispered prayers had evolved one final time. She was no longer asking for help, or expressing gratitude, or making commitments. She was simply living, fully present in a life that included love and hope and the kind of future that seemed impossible 6 months ago. Help me remember this feeling, she whispered as they reached the parking lot. Help me remember that good things can last. Ethan heard her and smiled. I'll help you remember, he said. Every day, for as long as you'll let me. The cliffs of Moher rose from the Atlantic, like ancient sentinels, their black stone faces, weathered by centuries of wind and salt spray. Maya stood at the edge of the viewing platform, her mother beside her, both of them silent in the face of such overwhelming beauty. It's different than I imagined, Elena said finally. More powerful. Everything's been more powerful than I imagined, Maya replied, thinking about the year that had passed since her mother's diagnosis. The fear, the hope, the love, all of it. Bigger than I thought I could handle. They'd been in Ireland for a week, splitting their time between the writing workshop in Dublin and day trips to places Maya had dreamed of visiting. The workshop had been everything she'd hoped for, a group of writers from around the world, sharing stories and techniques, and the kind of creative energy that Maya had forgotten she'd been missing. How's the long-distance relationship treating you? Alina asked, settling onto a bench that overlooked the ocean. Better than I expected, Maya admitted. Ethan's research is going well at Johns Hopkins. He's working on expanding the protocol. That helped you, trying to get it approved for broader use. And you're writing. I'm writing. Maya pulled out her phone, showing her mother the email she'd received that morning. The literary magazine in Boston wants to publish my story about the woman who learns to hope again. Elena read the email over her daughter's shoulder. Your first publication. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too. That's new. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below. Maya thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, exhausted, defined entirely by her role as a caregiver. That woman had whispered for help in hospital corridors, clinging to hope like a lifeline. Mom, Maya said, do you ever think about what would have happened if the treatment hadn't worked? Elena considered the question carefully. I think about it sometimes, but not in the way you might expect. What do you mean? I think about how we would have faced it together. How we would have found meaning in whatever time we had left. How we would have made sure that love was the last thing I felt and the first thing you remembered. Maya felt tears starting, but they were different from the tears she'd shed during the crisis. These were tears of gratitude, of recognition, of understanding that love was indeed the thing that had sustained them through everything. I used to think that asking for help was a sign of weakness, Maya said. I thought I had to solve everything myself, carry everything alone. And now I think asking for help is how we find the people who are meant to love us. How we discover that we're not alone in the world. Elena reached for her daughter's hand. You're not alone, sweetheart. You have me. You have Ethan. You have a whole life ahead of you, filled with people who will love you, and people you'll love in return. That evening, Maya video-called Ethan from their bed and breakfast in Dublin. The laptop balanced on the small table by the window. He appeared on screen wearing scrubs, clearly between surgeries. But his face lit up when he saw her. How are the cliffs, he asked. Magnificent. Life-changing. I understand now why people make pilgrimages to places like this. And the writing workshop, inspiring. I'm working on a new story about a doctor who learns to take risks again after losing someone he loves. Ethan's expression softened. Fiction or semi-autobiographical fiction, does it matter? All the best stories are true, even when they're made up. Maya, I have news. The FDA approved our protocol for phase 3 trials. We're going to be able to offer it to hundreds of patients. Maya felt her heart swell with pride, and something deeper, the satisfaction of knowing that her mother's suffering had contributed to something larger, something that would help other families facing similar battles. That's incredible. How many hospitals will be participating? 15, across the country. We're hoping to launch the trials this fall. I'm proud of you, Maya said, meaning it completely. You're saving lives. We're saving lives, Ethan corrected. Your mother's participation, your advocacy, your willingness to try something experimentally, all contributed to this. After they hung up, Maya sat at the small desk in her room and opened her laptop. She'd been working on a new piece, not fiction this time, but a memoir, about the year that had changed everything. The words came easily now, flowing from her fingers like water from a spring. She whispered, help me, until the day she realized she was no longer asking for rescue. She was asking for partnership, for companionship, for the kind of help that makes you stronger instead of more dependent. She was asking to be seen and known and loved. Not despite her struggles, but because of how she'd learned to face them. The stranger who said, I already am, didn't just take her hand. He showed her that help had been there all along, waiting for her to be brave enough to accept it. Maya looked out at the Irish countryside, at the green fields that rolled toward the horizon like promises, and whispered one more time, help me. Remember this. Help me remember that asking for help led to everything good in my life. The words felt different now, desperate or grateful or committed, but peaceful, complete. She was no longer a woman who needed rescuing. She was a woman who had learned to rescue herself, with the help of people who loved her enough to stand beside her in the fighting. The hospital garden at Mercy General had been transformed into something magical. White chairs arranged in neat rows faced an arch decorated with the same flowers Elena had planted during her recovery, daffodils and tulips that had bloomed faithfully for 2 springs in a row. The setting sun cast everything in golden light, making the ordinary space feel like a place where miracles were not only possible but expected. Maya stood at the garden's entrance, her wedding dress simple but elegant, her bouquet a mix of wildflowers and herbs from the garden where she'd learned to hope again. Elena stood beside her, radiant in her role as both mother of the bride and maid of honor, her hair grown back fuller and silver-streaked, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that comes from witnessing dreams fulfilled. Are you ready? Elena asked, adjusting Maya's veil. I've been ready for this my whole life, Maya replied. I just didn't know what I was getting ready for. The guests were a small but meaningful group, the nurses, who'd become like family during Elena's treatment. Dr. Peterson, who'd first introduced them to Ethan, colleagues from the writing workshop in Dublin, and Ethan's research team from Johns Hopkins, who'd driven down for the celebration. At the front of the gathering, Ethan waited in a simple black suit, his hands clasped behind his back. His expression soft, with the kind of anticipation that makes moments feel eternal. Before we walk down there, Elena said, I want to tell you something. Maya turned to her mother, expecting last-minute advice or sentimental words about love and marriage. 2 years ago, when I was first diagnosed, I made a list of things I wanted to live to see. Your wedding was at the top of that list. Mom, let me finish. I wanted to see you find someone who would love you the way you deserved to be loved. Someone who would see your strength and your vulnerability and choose both. Someone who would stand beside you in the hard times and celebrate with you in the good times. Maya felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. You got your wish. I got more than my wish. I got to see you learn to love yourself. I got to see you build a life that's bigger than just taking care of other people. I got to see you become the writer you always wanted to be. As they walked down the aisle together, Maya thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate nights in hospital corridors. The whispered prayers for help. The moment when a stranger had said, "I already am," and changed everything. The experimental treatment that had saved her mother's life. The love that had grown slowly and deliberately into something unshakable. The decision to build a future based on hope rather than fear. Ethan's eyes never left her face as she approached. When she reached him, he whispered, "You're beautiful," and Maya knew he meant more than just her appearance. He meant the life she'd built, the courage she'd developed, the love she'd learned to give and receive. The ceremony was simple but profound. They'd written their own vows, promising not just to love each other, but to continue growing into the people they were meant to be. Maya promised to never stop fighting for what mattered. Ethan promised to never stop believing in the possibility of healing. "I take you as my partner in all things," Maya said, her voice steady and sure. "In the work we do, in the dreams we chase, in the ordinary moments that make up a life. I promise to ask for help when I need it, and to offer help when you need it. I promise to remember that love is not about rescue, but about choosing each other every day. I take you as my companion, in hope," Ethan replied, "in the certainty that good things can last, that healing is possible, that love is the strongest medicine. I promise to help you remember your own strength when you forget it, and to let you remind me of mine when I need it." When the officiant pronounced them married, the garden erupted in applause, but Maya barely heard it. She was thinking about the woman who'd whispered "help me" in these same corridors 2 years ago, and how that woman had found exactly what she needed, even when she didn't know what she was asking for. During the reception, held in the hospital's community room, decorated with photos from their courtship and Elena's recovery, Maya found herself stepping outside for a moment of quiet. The garden was peaceful in the evening light, the flowers releasing their fragrance into the warm air. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, joining her on the bench where she'd had so many difficult conversations. "Only one," Maya replied. "What's that?"